Very often in the rush to get outside riding our e-bikes, we might forget a few basic setup points, but they're not so much mistakes as oversights in the excitement to get outside. So let's have a look at a few of them. So guys, a lot of the tips I'm going to talk about today are actually e-bike specific, because what can sometimes happen, you can actually lend your e-bike out to a friend who's never ridden an e-bike before, and they expect the setup to be exactly the same as a conventional bike, but that is simply not the case. Now the first one is handlebar position. On no end of occasions have I come back and a friend's borrowed my e-bike and they've tipped that handlebar forwards. And the reason for that is because when you ride a conventional bike, you're stood on the pedals, and when you're going up those banks, you're actually leaning over the front of the bike. Now on an e-bike, that is simply not the case. When you're doing climbs, more often than not, you're sat on the seat, and the handlebar really needs to be in the optimum position. So having it forwards is actually going to push you forwards, which means less traction on that back tyre. Now when I say the handlebar is too far forwards, what I mean is it's actually forwards of the vertical position. So when you get side on to your bike, the central part of the handlebar should be vertical. Obviously there's going to be back sweep on the handlebar, but that central piece needs to be in the vertical position. On the other end of the spectrum, you can actually have your handlebar too far backwards, which means it's leaning backwards from vertical. And what happens then is that when you're doing your climbing on your e-bike, you're too far back over the bike, which means that front wheel is going to be pawing in the air far too often. Right. Number two is lever position. Now as you can see, I'm on this flat single track and I'm riding, I've got my hands on the brakes, and it's actually quite a natural position to have the levers pointing down like that. However, what happens when you're going up or down the hill? Now if you've got those levers in that downward position and you're tackling a short sharp bank, those downward levers are actually pretty comfortable. However, keep those levers in that same downward position, and when you start going downhill, then you've got to increasingly curve your wrists over the front of the bike to get hold of those levers. So the sweet spot of your levers, where do you put them? Well, we're all different, we all ride in different ways, but I tend to find that they tend to work best when they're slightly down from the horizontal position, which makes it a really natural feeling when you stood up pedaling down through single track, when you're descending, or when you're climbing sat down. So there you go, slightly down from horizontal. Now one other thing I should mention about levers before we go off the subject is don't over tighten them, because if you come off, if the lever's got a little bit of movement in them, it simply moves on the handlebars rather than bends the lever. I'm going to move on now to stem. Now the first thing with stems is, again, don't over tighten that as well. When you rotate your handlebars, there should be good free movement there on the front wheel and the front fork, because if you over tighten the stem, it's going to grind, wear out your headset and make your steering absolutely horrendous. Now the second thing on your stem is make sure you get your stem in the right position. You can adjust the height of your stem by way of these spacers, which come either under it or on top of it. What I suggest is you should experiment with your stem position, because there's a sweet spot there for everybody. Right, I want to touch on something really quickly, and that's the length of your stem and the width of your handlebars. Now obviously a lot of you will have sorted this out in the bike shop, or whether you've ordered the bike online. Now what it comes down to is that the size of your bike is something that is fixed. However, the fit of your bike is something that you can alter. Now it comes down to very simple things. You know, maybe you feel a little bit stretched out on your bike. You know, maybe you've got like a 70mm or an 80mm stem on there. Bring it back, put a 40 or a 50 on there. At the same time, I see a load of people riding with these handlebars out here. You know, maybe go from an 800mm down to a 760mm bar. These things aren't fixed. You can find the sweet spot of your bike just by altering a few component parts on it. Now this is a classic. You might well have lent your e-bike to your mate who happens to be a downhiller. He brings the bike back and the seat is pointing in the air. Yeah, it's a cool thing to do. It's what downhillers do. It's their most comfortable position. On an e-bike, it's a no-no, because that's simply going to be forcing your weight over the back of the bike, and that front wheels are going to be pawing in the air. At the same time, you might well have lent your bike to a super tall rider and the bike's come back and the seat is all the way back in the rails. Again, this is something we want to avoid on an e-bike. You want a good central balanced position on that bike, not one that is biased forwards or rearwards. Seat height really is something that affects the way you ride. Now, a lot of downhillers obviously like to have their seat low down, which means you can maneuver that bike underneath you quite easily. And the same applies on an e-bike too, and even more so, because when you've got a seat that is low down, you can actually move your body forwards and backwards a lot easier than when your seat is right up in the air, because you're actually quite a fixed position when your seat's up there. Obviously it depends if you've got a dropper post or not, but make sure that your seat is actually quite a long way down in the slider there and not upwards, which means you haven't got that range of movement on your body on your e-bike. Now finally, tyres. I won't talk about tyres specifically because there's another video which you can find on that subject, but things such as tyre pressure. Now obviously this depends on the individual. I'm about sort of 90 kilos and I tend to run about 25 to 35 PS in my tyres if they're tubed. If they're tubeless, I tend to go up 2 or 3 PSI more. But something else which is really important on your tyre is make sure that they're seated correctly on the rim, because a lot of the time when you refit a tyre after you've got a puncture, or maybe if you're fitting a new tyre, then make sure that bead is correctly seated on the rim there. Otherwise the tyre is going to be wobbling around, which is going to affect your grip levels and your stability on your bike. So there you go, that's some basic setup mistakes on your e-bike and how to avoid them. If you want to see a video on more advanced sort of cockpit and fit techniques with your e-bike, check the video out down there. If you look at more about tyres, there's an in-depth tyre video. I can go on and on and on about tyres just down here. Let us know if you've got more setup mistakes. I'm sure there's hundreds out there. Leave your comments below. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and click on the globe to subscribe to EMBN so we can bring you even more e-bike videos.